It's 5:30 p.m., so let's call this meeting to order. And I'll begin by having you call the roll. I think that's your task, yes?
So, Ms. Heller,
Present.
Ms. Owens,
Present.
Mr. Klein,
Present.
Ms. Silva,
Present.
and Ms. Gaskin. Thank you.
Our next agenda item is approval of the minutes from the December 14th, 2022 meeting. And we will need a motion and a second for that.
I'm happy to make that motion.
I will second that motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Shall we call the roll? Okay, shall we just do all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Are there any agenda adjustments?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And is there any general public comment? Any attendees, even remotely? Okay. So the next agenda item is committee member and staff communications. Do we have any of those today?
No.
Thank you. So the next item is the election of the chair and the vice chair for 2023. And Cameron, do you want to bring us up to speed on that?
Sure, Madam Chair. Thank you. As most of you will recall, because you've been around for a bit now, each year at our February meeting, we have the committee nominate and then elect normally a vice chair only, but tonight we're going to do chair and vice chair. And the vice chair serves for a year and fills in when the chair is absent at the meetings. And normally the committee's practice has been for the vice chair to take over as chair. So after you serve a year as the vice chair, then you just kind of automatically roll into the chair position. This year, our vice chair was, or this past year, our vice chair was Betsy Weber, who moved out of state and had to resign from the committee as a result. So in this case, we don't have somebody to move from that position into the chair position. So we're gonna ask the committee to nominate a chair for the rest of this meeting and for the rest of this year, and also to nominate and elect a vice chair who will hopefully take that as kind of historic route and become the chair at the beginning of next year. So with that, I'll turn it over to the committee. I should just note Chair Gaskin has served as chair for the past 2 years, and we're really grateful to that. She's done an excellent job. She's out of town tonight, but she did say she is willing, if the committee is looking for somebody to continue to serve in either role or any role that would be helpful for the committee. So she's not campaigning, she's just just expressing her willingness to serve in any capacity. So thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. So let me open it up to the committee and ask if anyone is interested in serving in either of those roles. Is this a resounding silence, I hear?
I'd be willing to serve in the role of the vice chair if that were, something that was available and acceptable. It's fine.
Okay.
And I heard rumors that Lee, perhaps you might be interested in serving as our chair for the next coming year.
I will say that I'm willing, which is a slightly different verb than, but I am willing to do so. And we also still have Lori as a possibility to continue as chair. So I guess what I would suggest is that we have nominations for who people feel they would like to serve. We'll do the chair first and then do the vice chair, although I think that one's a pretty easy one. Do we have any nominations for chair?
Lee, I'm going to nominate you for chair.
Okay. Do we have any seconds for that?
I would be happy to second that, and thank you for your willingness to serve in that role.
Okay, so we have a motion and second to elect me, Lee Heller, as chair of the committee for 2023. Do we want to do just acclamation? Or okay, so all in favor, say aye.
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 I guess I voted myself aye. Any opposed? No abstentions. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. And we also have someone willing to serve as vice chair. Can I get a motion to nominate
I'll nominate Chris as vice chair.
And I'm happy to second that nomination.
Thank you, and we'll go ahead and take a vote on that motion in second. So all in favor of Chris serving as vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. We have a new chair and vice chair. Thank you for being willing to serve. And let's say thank you to Lori for 2 years of dedicated service, and to Betsy for serving as vice chair and on this committee for several years, if I recall. So she's out in the wilds of Wyoming, and we will miss her. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So that item is taken care of, and the next item is the 2023 subcommittee appointments. Cameron, you want to take us through that?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Now is the time when you get to exercise your great power as the chair and appoint members for the subcommittee. So just a little bit of background. Since its creation, the Creeks Advisory Committee has created subcommittees for various purposes, really specific purposes. So it's a subgroup of the committee made up of 3 members, because being a 7-member committee for Brown Act purposes, a subcommittee has to have less than half of the committee or not a quorum. So the Creeks Division staff is proposing that we have 2 committees moving forward into the coming year, just like we've had over the past year, and those are the Budget Subcommittee, which is a standing committee. Since we do the budget every year, we have the Budget Subcommittee every year, and that is a Brown Act committee, so we do notice those meetings for the public to attend. Historically, what the committee has elected to do in those situations is to have the Budget Committee be represented by the chair of the committee, the vice chair of the committee, and the immediate past chair of the committee. And I think the reason the committee's done that is just those tend to be the longest serving members of the committee. It doesn't have to be that. That's just what the committee has chosen to do in the past.
Cameron?
Yes.
At the moment, we only have 5 committee members. So that would be more than, less than a majority of this committee if we had 3 members on that committee.
Thank you for recognizing that, but I believe that I believe that in order to achieve a quorum, since it's still a 7-member committee, it still would be 4, just as it is for us to hold this meeting tonight.
Okay, thank you.
So, but thanks for pointing that out. So the chair gets to appoint, but you can do the same process or whatever process you'd like to for the budget subcommittee. And then the second committee that we're recommending is an ad hoc committee. So that's a year-to-year decision to have that committee move forward. What we're recommending is an education and outreach subcommittee. We have that currently. Let me just make sure I have this right. The current committee for 2022 was made up of Lee and Chris and Sophia. And so all of you are still here, and if you're all still interested, you could continue on that committee. This year, for that committee, I think in the past year, you worked on the public education plan. We made that more of an annual type of plan, so the subcommittee will follow up on where we are with that and what the goals were last year, and see where we are with those, and then also setting the goals for next year. And also, to spice it up a little this year, we will be doing a water quality public opinion survey, and this is something required under the city's stormwater discharge permit. So every 5 years, we have to do a public opinion survey and just see how our outreach efforts are going on a longer term check-in. And so I think the subcommittee will be involved in that. I spoke with Liz Smith about this over the past week, and she's just working on getting the request for proposals together for that. So it would probably be sometime this summer that the committee would be engaged in that process. So those are the 2 committees we're recommending, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair, to discuss with the committee and make the appointments.
Thank you. So my suggestion would just be to see what people want to do. This is pretty informal. Obviously, I could use my powers to simply require you attend, but does anybody want to serve on budget such that that would supersede Chris and me playing that role?
So we did confirm that there's 3 people on the budget, on each committee? Okay.
Correct.
Well, I mean, if the recommendation is that it would be Lori and then you two, then that's fine with me, but I'm also willing and able to serve on both committees.
Okay. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I'm fine with the status quo. I think it makes sense to have, a past chair involved, just from a continuation of knowledge and expectation. So I'm happy to continue to serve on that committee myself, so I would recommend status quo.
Okay. Penny?
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan to me, to stick with the status quo for the chair, vice chair, and then the previous chair.
So who's going to be on the education committee then?
I'm happy to step in and switch over to that committee.
Great, so we'll have Penny on that.
I'm also happy to stay on that committee.
Okay, and this year, were there only 2 members on education?
No, Madam Chair, it was you and Chris and Sophia.
Okay, so if we want 3 again, I'm willing to stay on education as well, since education's my background, so. And then Chris, you want to stay in education and just have more people, or do you want to just do budget?
I think I'll stick to the numbers.
Okay, budget guy. So I think we have our members then, so the budget committee will be me, Chris, and Lori, and the education committee will be me, Penny, and Sophia? And do we need a vote on that? No, I'm making appointments, so I hereby appoint all of us to those roles. Anything else we need to do on that item?
No, Madam Chair, just one clarification. The Budget Subcommittee is a noticed public hearing, so all the committee and the public are welcome to attend. It's just a matter of taking action to make a recommendation on behalf of the subcommittee that would just be limited to the 3 votes, but you're absolutely welcome and encouraged to be there,
And we'd love to have you.
for sure.
All right, I think we've taken care of that item, and let's move on to the business items, starting with the Stormwater Management Program report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce Jim Rumbley. He is our project planner, and he essentially administers the whole stormwater management program for the city of Santa Barbara. And we're lucky to have him on the staff, and he's going to provide you with an update for all of the work the city's been doing over the past year. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. For the Stormwater Management Program, we'll start off with some background information, and then we'll go over the components that make up the program. We'll talk about some next steps with the program, and then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for any questions you all might have. You might have heard the Stormwater Management Program referred to as the SWMP, SWMP. That's what a lot of the city employees refer to it as. But it's basically just a set of policies and rules that are detailed in the city's general permit, which is issued by the State Water Board. And it allows the city to discharge stormwater to the creeks and ocean. The Creeks Division is responsible for the overall coordination of the program. However, most city employees are responsible for complying with the many measurable goals that have to be achieved each year. There's 6 primary components of the SWMP, and we'll go through each of those briefly. The first component is construction runoff control. This is primarily the purview of the city's Building and Safety Division. It involves construction projects, proposing how they're going to deal with keeping sediment on site during storms. So the erosion and sediment control plans identify where the control measures are going to be installed, and staff will review those plans and then go out into the field and make sure that those measures to keep the sediment on site are installed properly. Last fiscal year, 580 erosion and sediment control plans were reviewed by staff, and 876 inspections were performed after those permits were issued. The city is required to keep detailed inspection records and a running inventory of all current projects, all issued building permits that have these erosion and sediment control plans. This is a handout that applicants receive to help them with their erosion and sediment control plans. It has items such as covering dumpsters, protecting storm drains with sandbags, having perimeter controls such as sandbags and straw wattles, covering materials on site, and designating an area where concrete trucks can wash out, or any types of washing can happen on site. The next component we'll talk about is illicit discharge detection and elimination. The Creeks Division has a code enforcement officer that responds to all illicit discharge reports that come in. We have a hotline that is monitored during business hours. I encourage any of you to give it a call, 897-2688, if you happen to see something that you don't think looks right that's in the street. Our permit requires that we respond to all enforcement calls within 24 business hours. And last fiscal year, we had 142 illicit discharge reports, and all of them responded to within 24 hours. The code enforcement officer is also responsible for training all city field staff to make sure that no illicit discharges that they happen during their course of duties. The code enforcement officer also coordinates the contract for getting trash removed from the city's creeks and beaches. Last year, our contractors removed over 86,000 pounds of trash. Here's a couple of examples of illicit discharges that have happened recently. The first is an oil spill on the left, and the second is a construction-related slurry discharge. Fortunately, most of the calls that come in are not this egregious, but we might not always be able to figure out who's responsible and issue a notice of violation or a citation, but we can always work to get it cleaned up and prevent that getting washed down during a storm. Similarly, when we come across encampments like this or get reports of encampments, we can have our contractor come out and remove all of the trash from the waterways and adjacent creek banks. The next component we'll talk about is outreach. We have an outreach coordinator, Liz Smith, that implements education and outreach related to improving creek and ocean water quality. This includes presentations in schools and coordinating volunteer opportunities like creek and beach cleanups. Each year, there's a creek week with events that this year included restoration site tours along the creeks, events at the creeks. You might have remembered hearing about Coffee at the Creek, and online water quality presentations. Outreach also involves media campaigns. Currently, we have a TikTok-inspired "We're All the Solution to Water Pollution." Hopefully, you've seen the commercials. There's a real catchy jingle that goes along with some of those commercials. And Cameron alluded to it, but upcoming, we have a public awareness survey, which is something that we're required to do as part of our permit every 5 years. We're also going to be filming or creating new public service announcement commercials this year. Here's an example of a bus ad that you might have seen for "We're All the Solution to Water Pollution." The next program component we'll talk about is post-construction requirements. This is the component of our program that I spend most of my time working on. And you can think of post-construction requirements as the ongoing stormwater treatment after construction projects are completed. So currently in the city, if a project proposes at least 1 square foot of new or redeveloped impervious area, there's going to be some level of stormwater post-construction compliance. So what does compliance mean? So some examples of treatment methods to comply include permeable pavers, impervious concrete, bioswales, bioretention systems, and retention basins. The list of projects here that you can see: new police station, De La Guerra Plaza, Paseo Nuevo, the zoo, Ortega Park, the library, and the Modoc Las Positas bike path. All of those large projects either have complied with our highest level of stormwater compliance, or they will comply once they're completed. Last fiscal year, Creeks Division staff conducted over 900 plan reviews to make sure that projects proposing development comply with the city's post-construction requirements. Recently, our post-construction requirements have changed. As of 2021, the City Council adopted changes to our municipal code and our guidance manual to update the rules to make the requirements more flexible, equitable, and effective, while continuing to ensure that water quality level of protection is maintained or increased. The Water Board also had to agree with the changes that were made, and they made the determination that they were equally or more protective of water quality. It used to be that the stormwater compliance and requirements, or we call them tiers, so we have tiers 1 through 4, were dependent on not only the amount of new and replaced impervious surfaces, but where the project was located and what level of review, like did it have to go to the Planning Commission? Those were all factored in to determine your tier, and it was really confusing, and it was kind of difficult and not really fair to determine the level of compliance. So under the new requirements, that's been changed, so only the amount of new and redeveloped impervious area that's proposed determines your tier. Some other changes with the new requirements include stormwater infiltration is now required for tiers 2, 3, and 4. Whereas previously, only projects that proposed an increase in impervious area had to infiltrate stormwater on site. Also, tier 3 projects now are required to treat 95% of impervious area instead of 100% before. And this is because inevitably on most sites, there is a certain area of the site that's really difficult to treat, and that last little bit of treatment can be really expensive. For example, just think of a really steep driveway and how you would capture that stormwater at the end of the driveway. It can be really tough to do and really expensive. So this little bit of relief has really helped applicants. I mentioned a new tier 4. That's our highest level of compliance, and this is only for the very largest projects. Tier 4 kicks in at about 15,000 square feet of new and redeveloped impervious area. And for tier 4, the difference between tier 3 and tier 4, for tier 3, our amount of retention is typically the 1-inch 24-hour storm. For tier 4, you have an additional retention requirement up to the 2.4-inch 24-hour storm for new impervious area on site. We'll quickly go over some examples of the BMPs or treatment measures that applicants often use. What you see here is some permeable pavement examples. On the left is a hydroflow paver, and for that paver, the paver itself is actually permeable, so the water percolates through the paver itself, as opposed to the permeable paver on the right, where it's a conventional paver, but it has a wide joint that's filled with aggregates, so the water can flow through that joint or flow in between the pavers in that joint. And below the surface is about 12 inches of aggregate. It serves as a basin, so stormwater can fill that basin up, and then it can slowly percolate into the ground. We also see permeable concrete proposed. The picture on the left, you can see conventional concrete in the foreground and permeable concrete in the background, and see how different it looks. And the difference with permeable concrete is there's less fines in that mix, so water it's much easier for water to pass through permeable concrete. And similarly with permeable asphalt, there's less fines in that mix as well. It's an example of a retention basin. We see these proposed on sites with a lot of space. They're basically a pond, and all stormwater on site can be directed to them, and the pond fills up. This one in particular has an overflow, so once it meets the required capacity, it can pass through without treatment and escape. But eventually the stormwater will infiltrate into the ground for retention basins. The last BMP I'll discuss is a bioretention planter. These can be really useful for treating stormwater on really tight lots where there's not a lot of space. The photo on the right, you can see this area here. That's where the bioretention planter is. It's actually on the roof. So this is a lot line to lot line site where infiltration just wasn't an option, but we can still get some treatment with these planters. And there's options for infiltration as well. A lot of these planters are lined, but they can be unlined too to allow for infiltration. Water quality monitoring is another component of our program. Dr. Jill Murray is our research coordinator, and each year Jill prepares a research and monitoring plan. Recently, this has included dry weather sampling of outfalls. Outfalls is basically just where the storm drain enters into the creek. And so really during dry weather, there shouldn't be any type of water coming out of that. So we want to, if there is water, we want to sample those to figure out what's going on there. The monitoring plan also included monitoring of impaired water bodies for bacteria and toxicity. Most of the creeks in town are considered impaired or polluted. The monitoring plan also focuses on pollutant load modeling to determine the reduction in pollutants that our program has achieved over time. The most recent component of our program, the last one we'll talk about, is trash capture. This is going to be something that we focus on once our new permit is issued. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But the trash capture requirements have to be fully implemented in the city by 2030. And so what we've done so far is we've figured out our priority areas that were required by our permit. These priority areas are the areas where we have to capture trash 5 millimeters or greater, which is about the diameter of a cigarette butt. And we have to prevent that from entering the storm drain system and continuing on to the creeks and the ocean. So you can see our priority areas are bus stops, commercial, industrial, mixed use, and high-density residential land use areas. There's a couple of options that have been approved by the Water Board, and we haven't decided which ones we're going to use yet. We're going to have to figure out the most cost-effective solution for the city. But what you see on the left is a continuous deflection separation unit, or CDS unit for short. And on the right is a connector pipe screen. There's a big difference in the cost of these measures, of these types of capture options. The CDS unit is really expensive, but you don't need many of them. So you have a high upfront cost, but your maintenance cost should be lower going forward. Whereas the connector pipe screen, you need one of those in every catch basin. So the city has, many catch basins. And so they're relatively cheap to install, but if you're factoring out every catch basin, every few storms, that can get really expensive. So, we've got some work ahead of us to figure out what is going to be most cost effective for the city. So each year we submit an online annual report through the state's website. The Creeks Division is responsible for compiling all of the summaries that we receive from the city departments on all the measurable goals, and we produce this annual report. The most recent annual report we submitted in October of last year, and we have another annual report due in October of this year. This will be year 10 of our permit that was adopted by the Water Board in 2013. It was originally designed to be a 5-year permit, but the Water Board has not yet issued that new permit. They've taken their time with it. And we keep, every year when I give this presentation, I seem to say, we're anticipating adoption at the end of the year. Well, we're still waiting, and I'm going to say it again. We're hopeful that we'll have a new permit by the end of this year. But until then, we'll continue complying with our permit. That's the end of my presentation, but if you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer those for you.
Do any of the committee members have questions?
Go ahead, Sophia.
I remember going through the recommendation for City Council for the construction projects. Is that, like, the current policies and the way that it's done now, are you guys pretty happy with that, or do you foresee in, like, the near future to revise that?
We're not planning to revise it at the moment. We're capturing a lot of projects, more projects than before.
Okay.
Accessory dwelling units, you probably might have heard a lot about those.
Yeah.
Those are not exempt from requirements, so they
Okay.
have to comply as well. There's trade-offs. We're not seeing as many tier 3 projects
Yeah.
as before. So that was the tier 3 projects is where you have to capture and treat stormwater from all impervious surface on the entire site.
Yeah.
But we're seeing a lot of tier 2 projects.
Okay.
The tier 2 projects are between 500 and 2,000 square feet. And you don't have to capture all stormwater on the entire parcel for those. So say, you have 1,000 square feet of new roof area.
Mm-hmm.
With tier 2, you would capture 1,000 square feet anywhere on site. So it's flexible. And, people seem to, in just my anecdotal experience, people seem to have an easier time complying with the requirements now.
Okay,
After the
cool.
new requirements have taken place.
Cool.
So,
Well.
yeah, I'm sure there's some complaints that could be heard, but we don't hear as many anymore.
Okay, great. Well, glad to hear it and good work. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. I had a question kind of on the same topic, really, of the construction runoff.
Sure.
And I was just curious if, with the January storm, in general, how you felt that performed. Like, were you happy with, gosh, it could have been worse and our efforts paid off, or did it become maybe contrary to that? I'm just interested in your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, we got about 6 to 7 inches of rain that day. And most of the BMPs or the treatment measures that are required only have to capture that 1-inch storm. So, I mean, it was 6, 7 times as much as those were supposed to require, was supposed to handle. So, most of what gets installed have really good overflows. So once the permeable pavers fill up, water will just sheet flow off, or those bioretentions will have like a weir overflow, or what they call a grate overflow that's kind of elevated, so the water can pond to a certain level and then it spills out. And I didn't get any calls saying, what I installed on my property is destroyed or ruined my property, which is a good thing. But we do inspections of those during the rain. Every year, we're required to do at least 20 hours of inspections each year to see how these improvements are performing. And, for the most part, they do well. There are some projects that just weren't, built great, or, they haven't been maintained, of course. But, yeah, for the most part, I think they perform pretty well. Oh, sure.
Madam Chair, if I could just add one thing. I want to emphasize that the storm we had in January, and we're going to have a presentation on that in a few minutes, was really significant. And so, as Jim mentioned, in 24 hours, we had over 6 inches of rain in the downtown area. So, the reason the regulatory environment is for 1 inch in 24 hours is that's what our regulators, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, that's their requirement on the city, and that is what is called the 85th percentile storm. So the great majority of the storms that we get in Santa Barbara or Santa Barbara County even are 1 inch or less. So it picks up most of the storms that come through. When we get a big gully washer like that, it's not going to do water treatment for all of those. But I did want to point out the other side of that Jim was referring to, and that is, when the Creeks Division staff and the city staff in general, we don't design the best management practices. We're reviewing the proposals from architects and engineers and landscape architects for private development, and so we're not recommending specific designs for a certain project, and we don't want to, because we don't want to take that on in terms of potential liability. All these sites are different, and the property owner is usually the most familiar. So they'll propose BMPs, but I wanted just to show an example of what Jim was talking about. So, on the right, you see a permeable paver project, but you also see a, standard grate type storm drain on the top. And usually what people design and what the Creeks Division's designed into our projects is some kind of default. So when you do get a big storm, you're not just relying on this best management practice that's designed to catch 1 inch of rain. They have a traditional drain. So once the water fills up underneath those pavers, it just runs over the surface and goes down the drain. And similarly with the retention basin photo that Jim had, you see whoops, we just had it. So once that fills up, you see the water will just, before it flows out and across the sidewalk, it goes into that little curbed off area and will drop down into the drain and out into Mission Creek. But otherwise, we'll catch a lot of runoff water off a really significant sized development downtown. before that happens. So 85% of the storms essentially will get all of the water soaking into the ground, going back into groundwater, all being treated. But in those big ones, it's out, and there's a safety consideration there too.
Penny, did you have any questions or comments?
Less of a question, just more of a comment. Just wanted to thank you, Jim, for all your work on that, all those inspections. It was great to hear. I did have a question kind of along the lines of Sophia. It was great to hear that those updates on the stormwater management project are working and we're still capturing that stormwater, but it's more flexible for the projects and the property owners. That's great to hear. So yeah, just thanks for all your work.
Yeah.
And I have a small question about the small retention projects on the very limited sites. So for example, you showed the slide of the planters up on the roof. Where does the overflow water go when you have a storm like we had on January 9th, which I'm assuming those little basins, whether on the ground or on the roof, cannot handle that level of water?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to see, but there's 2 overflow risers right here. So, you know, when the water gets to a certain level, it'll spill out through these they're little caps. They call them atrium grates. And the water will spill out, and then it's going to go to the storm drain system. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a really informative presentation.
Yeah, no problem.
And if there's no other questions, this is not an action item, so I think we just thank you for the presentation and feel very informed and move on to the very exciting January 2023 storm recap, which was very dramatic. Cameron, were you even here when it happened? Oh, you were present, okay. Thank you.
What's up? Oh, I'm ready. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, as a couple of you have mentioned, we had a couple big storms come through in January, and it does feel a little bit funny to have an item on our agenda just to talk about a rainstorm that came through town, but it really was a whopper. So we're gonna cover some points, and I really wanted to bring it to the committee because because it was recent, it was really dramatic, and I wanted to put something on the agenda to be able to address any questions. So if I don't cover something that you're interested in, I'm happy to expand the breadth to whatever questions you might have. This is just a vehicle for us to be able to have a discussion about it. So so with that, I'll jump in and talk a little bit about the storm. It was really a series of a couple of storm fronts that came through January 9th and 10th. Downtown at the county building, at the gauge there, we had 6.94 inches, and at San Marcos Pass, 18.2 inches over the course of that storm. According to the National Weather Service, this was the largest storm since January 5th through 7th, 2005. So they don't come around very often. In fact, in the time that the Creeks Division's been around, that 2005 storm was the biggest. This one was a little bigger. There's new terms coming into the lexicon around our weather these days. One of them you probably heard about on news reports is atmospheric river, and that's just a concentration of moisture in the air, and it will direct over a certain area and end up dropping a lot of rain. Another term that you read more in a weather forecast than are likely to hear on the news, but we've been hearing a lot is orographic enhancement, and that's something we see a lot of in Santa Barbara because of our east-west facing mountain range. And if we get a storm coming in with some wind from the south that pushes that storm up or pushes that moisture up because the wind's blowing against the mountains and concentrating that, it'll squeeze more rainfall out. So often when you see a National Weather Service forecast for our area, which is all the way from LA to San Luis Obispo, they'll talk about the areas with east-west mountain ranges seeing a significant amount of orographic enhancement. Well, when they say that, that's us. That's the Santa Barbara County South Coast, including the city of Santa Barbara. And then I just wanted to mention, and this has been around for probably close to 5 years-ish now, but pretty much all of the local climate change modeling that I'm seeing coming out is all talking about less frequent, more extreme storm events. And so we seem to be seeing that all over the world right now, but these things have happened before, but that's what the modeling is showing, and so that's what we're trying to think about as we're planning going forward, both with regard to sea level rise, but also factoring in what's going to happen in our drainage channels throughout the city. These are a couple of screenshots I took during the storm. The one on the left with all the text, that's just part of the forecast discussion from the National Weather Service. You can see, as I was saying, the first part of that up at the top says, this has been the most impressive storm. I guess they don't call it the most significant. They're impressed by it since January 5th through 7th, 2005. And they talk about, locally 15.5 inches of rain has already fallen, and then they go on to say, all eyes now are on round 2 of the storm, which is going to bring some more rain to the area. And then on the right is from the county website where you can watch real-time rainfall totals, and it's pretty cool to watch if you're sort of a rain geek. But you can see I caught this one about a little after 5 o'clock in the morning, and you can see I'll point my cursor to it, but you can't see that if you're watching a replay, but it's up at the top left of that is 14.88 inches. That's at the top of San Marcos Pass. So I almost caught the peak of the 24-hour rainfall, but I missed it by a little bit. But so almost 15 inches on this one, and then down kind of in the center, down towards the bottom at 5.83 inches. That's the county building down in the city of Santa Barbara. And so the totals were over 15 inches in 24 hours on San Marcos Pass. That's a record rainfall amount from the Santa Barbara Flood Control District's historic records. And then we had over 6 inches in 24 hours downtown. Jill Murray made this slide for us to look at, to kind of compare to other significant rain years we've had in Santa Barbara. And the colors, where there are joint colors, just indicate that it's the same year, so it doesn't look like they're different years. But you can see 95 was just a blowout year, and in January of 95 we had a massive, really massive storm. And what that's showing when it says flow CFS, that's cubic feet per second. So that's just our measurement for the volume of water coming down our creek channels. This is at a U.S. Geological Survey and Flood Control District gauge that was in Mission Creek at Los Olivos Street. So it says Mission Creek at Mission, but it's actually Los Olivos Street. So they had something on the order of 5,800 cubic feet per second moving down Mission Creek in January, and then had another big one in March '95 that was about the same size of what we just saw in January 9th and 10th of this year. February '98, another El Nino year, boom, and it was another big one. And then what National Weather Service referred to the 05 stuff, that's what you see in green right there. So NYE's New Year's Eve 2004, and then into January of 2005, and you're looking at flows that are a little less than or pretty much equal to what we saw coming down our creeks from this past storm. And then we have February 2017, another good sized storm. The reason January 18 is in there is she just wanted to indicate to and remind all of us that that's when debris flow happen in Montecito. And you can see that the creek wasn't flowing that much. We just had such an intense rainfall come over a short period of time after a wildfire. And that, so you don't necessarily need these giant flows to cause massive destruction when the conditions are right. But there we are, January 2023, just over 2,000 cubic feet per second coming down, but then the gauge blew out. So that amount is actually an estimate from the USGS on what the flow was. It knocked the gauge out. So our rainfall in Santa Barbara, they measure these in return periods. You hear people talk mostly about a 100-year storm. That's a FEMA number. And what those means is it doesn't mean that it happens every 25 years or happens every 100 years. A 100-year storm event means you have a 1% chance of that storm happening every year. So that's really rare. So a 25-year event would be a 4% chance of that kind of storm happening every year. And then they measure them in time periods. So a common recurrence period is a 12-hour or a 24-hour storm. And that's why we have that 1 inch in 24-hour thing is a separate regulation. But this is a 25-year event for both the 1 to 12-hour and 24-hour. And that just gives you a sense of the intensity of the rain we had. Up on the top of San Marcos Pass, because of that orographic enhancement and atmospheric river stuff, we were looking at a 200-year event. It was a record. Their records up at the top of the pass for the gauge for the county go back to 1965. 69 was just a massive flood year, but here we are. We've got a record rainfall that even beat the 69 numbers for the 12 and 24-hour rain periods. So 200-year event, 0.5% chance of that happening in any given year. And then they measure the creek flow as compared to the rainfall as a return period, and that's 25 to 50-year event. So somewhere in that range, there's still Flood Control District and USGS work on hammering out those numbers, and they're still working on the final. They also measure a stage height. So that's sort of like, think of the water surface elevation within the creek. They don't necessarily measure it as elevation because they're scientists and the elevations can change within the creek. So it's really a qualitative comparison of a stage height. And one of the things we saw is even though one of those gauges blew out, we did see just in that one day on the 9th when it was really coming down, you saw jumps of, essentially doubling the stage height within Mission Creek. I will say as an aside, the flow gauges in Santa Barbara, the number of flow gauges, the locations and sites have been decreasing over time and becoming less reliable. We're looking at putting some money into our budget over the next 2-year budget to try to improve our data collection abilities, and we're talking with the Flood Control District on how to complement each other on that for the city creeks. We also hear people talking about where are we with our normal, kind of what's our normal rainfall here. We measure, in the water world, you measure in the water as a water year. So that goes from September 1st through August 31st is called the water year. And these are our numbers to date, and then our numbers based on our normal rainfall. And so for downtown, the city of Santa Barbara, we're at 187% of where we normally are at this time of year. And we're almost at 120% of our normal annual rainfall already for the water year. So we've cleared normal already. San Marcos Pass, boom, we're way above, especially for this time of year. Reservoirs filled up back over on the other side of the mountain. Gibraltar was spilling, and Cachuma, and this was as of 2 days ago, 99.9% of capacity. Okay, with a big storm, for us, it definitely has a significant impact on water quality, no doubt about it. We have all the urban runoff issues that we have even with smaller storms. So you've got a significant amount of pollutants from hydrocarbons, bacteria, nutrients, sediment, all kinds of stuff, trash, everything's running off. So you guys are very familiar with those kinds of issues, and you know, you get a big storm like this, and things just are kind of out the window. We get a lot of debris washing off the urban areas, but also coming down the creeks. You know, from big trees to a lot of woody debris to then plastics and trash and junk, and the debris comes not only down the creeks and from the city, but it also then comes in from the ocean into the lagoons. So this photo on the left side is the bird refuge lagoon along the beach, and you can see there's all kinds of different colored plastics and stuff in there, and I had to blow up and pull out this thing because even the kitchen sink got washed out to the ocean and then brought into the lagoon at the bird refuge. And then on the right, we had a couple of sewage spills in the city. There was one actually down in Montecito, and then there were two in the city, one in Mission Creek and one in Sycamore Creek. Both beaches were closed by the county health director. As soon as they were discovered, they were fixed by the city's wastewater folks. They got right out and fixed it. But you can see in the photo, we discovered, we had our contractor going and cleaning up some trash, and they saw this pipe completely sheared off. And so we don't know exactly what happened to it. That's a sewer line, a sewer main. And we don't know exactly what happened to it, but likely it's under a bridge and it's exposed like that. It was probably a large tree trunk came down, and the water was probably all the way up there and just slammed into it and snapped it right off. So down below that, there was obvious, you know, sewage down there, and then right next to it, you can see repaired. And another impact was flooding, and this is just, you know, could show lots of different types of photos, but this is right outside the old Creeks office on 620 Laguna Street. You can see why they call it Laguna. It's that, you know, that guy's driving up. This was taken on the third step up of the building, and the water was just kind of lapping up right at the top of those stairs. And you know, the left side of that photo is actually the parking lot. It's a permeable paver parking lot, and it's just completely underwater. And people were driving through it. And then the one on the lower picture is of, I think that's Bath Street, and water came up. I was trying to find a video I saw of a dumpster floating down Bath Street. I mean, it was just, the water was flowing. It was crazy. So, but a huge mess to clean up afterwards. So, so I was just going to kind of go through and look at some videos and some photos of some of our creeks, and then some of the Creeks Division projects. This was taken just at the downstream end of Oak Park, just looking up at the creek flowing through, and you can see it's kind of filled up, but not a problem there. That's the lower end of the reach of one of our future projects, doing some restoration in Oak Park. Here's Arroyo Burro down at the mouth at the estuary, and it's just cranking away, but doing just fine. You can see the water's pretty muddy coming down after that kind of rain. Sycamore Creek, this is over by Cacique and Soledad Street intersection. A little video of that. You can see some tree limbs coming down there. Oh, whoops, I forgot something. I had we had some video that we took off of Instagram. This was a gentleman, I believe he's a teacher up at Santa Barbara Middle School, Chad Springer, who took some video of different locations in Mission Creek, and it's pretty dramatic. I think he caught the height of the storm, so I wanted to show you guys. This one's a little bit longer, and the first thing you'll see is taking downstream from Talent Road. So that's an old Creeks Division project. So you'll see it's just, I mean, it is really raging. And so it was a good test for that project to see whether it would hold up. And then there's one of the footbridge in Oak Park. You'll recognize that. And then you'll recognize the mosaic alligators up in Rocky Nook Park. So there's a little bit at the end that's from a little bit higher up in Mission Creek watershed. So that's from Talent Road looking downstream. Doesn't seem like the safest place to be in the storm, but that's looking upstream from there. There's the alligator. So really, really cranking. San Roque Creek in Stevens Park, it pretty much filled the creek top of bank to top of bank there, but didn't overflow. And then we're going to look at some of our projects. So this is the new footbridge over at the Royal Open Space. And in this video, I wanted you to this is looking downstream from the pedestrian bridge there. And I wanted you guys to focus on kind of what happens to the water as it trails off in the next video to the right of the screen. So that's the main channel over there, and then the water over here is actually going around as part of our restoration project. We widened the creek and put in some floodplain terraces, and so we really expanded the habitat zone, but it also provides a benefit for flooding and for water quality. And you'll see in the next picture, this is after. And so the water dropped down, so the water's cruising along still here in Arroyo Burro in the main channel, but this is what that floodplain looks like. So a lot of water goes over there. When you widen out the flow, it slows down the energy, it takes the energy out, and that drops a lot of that sediment out. And so it's almost like a beach over there now. So it basically did its job and accommodated that. This is our project on Upper Las Positas Creek. This is over at the Santa Barbara Golf Course. And this is just one of the large retention basins we have there, and that's the overflow. And you can see it's just spilling out over there, and the basin's completely full. We have two basins over there. They accommodate over 4 million gallons of runoff water, and in between the storms, we drain the basins out essentially and let them refill. And Erin Markey was responsible for that, and she said that particular basin that we're seeing in that video, she drained it more than 3 times, completely drained it out, and it filled back up. And then we have another one that doesn't collect as much urban runoff. It collects a smaller neighborhood runoff from a smaller neighborhood. We emptied that one twice, I think she said. So, and they're both completely full now. No, I didn't hear about that.
There's hundreds of golf balls all over the beach that people were finding and posting on. And we took the Ocean Guardians down there, and they were finding them. And one of the kids was like, "How did all these golf balls get here?" And I was like, "Everyone sit down. We're going to talk about how they got here." But it was seeing that, you can see how they just flushed out.
Yeah, so for somebody watching, we were just talking about golf balls being down in the creek. We didn't have a microphone on. So golf balls could get down there from that basin potentially, but there are multiple golf courses along Arroyo Burro throughout the watershed. And if you hike up there and you do a whole creek cleanup, you'll find lots of golf balls down there. Pretty common. So this is a view of Mission Creek looking down from the Talent Road Bridge. So this is a restoration project we did. This used to be just a concrete bed through here, and we built a series of pools down there. So that project fared pretty well. We will have some repairs and some fixes to do on several of our projects, but generally speaking, they all fared well. This is looking upstream at that same project, and you can just kind of see the different pools and riffles through here. And then you're all familiar with this because we did a site visit out to Oak Park, and we talked about this bathroom. In 1995, this bathroom was filled 4 feet high in mud. In this storm, you can see the rack line from the water, and if it's hard to see here, but you can see it goes all the way around there. So it came up to the building, but it didn't really go inside. And then I'll finish with this. So this was an interesting find. A day or two after the storm, I was going and checking out how things looked as the waters were receding, and I saw that buoy and took a photo of it up in Sycamore Creek. And so it's a ways up there, hundreds of feet up Sycamore Creek, and that's a buoy that normally sits just outside of the harbor entrance between the harbor and Stearns Wharf. And John Palmentary had sent out some social media about that because the Harbor Patrol, I think, actually picked it up. It's a Coast Guard buoy. I think the Harbor Patrol sent somebody to pull it out of Mission Creek and take it back up to the harbor. So it's just resting inside a safer location now. And he notes that it was up in Sycamore Creek, and for those who hear it, it's considered close to unbelievable. But we got some photographic, non-photoshopped proof right there. So that was it. So happy to address any questions or hear any comments that you have.
Thank you so much for that, Cameron. That was fascinating for those of us sitting in our houses when the rain was sluicing down, not going out and seeing what was going on. It's nice to see it in retrospect. Questions or comments from the committee members? Sophia?
Yeah, I guess, well, it's fascinating. I live right near Oak Park, so got to see that pretty much live action, maybe not as bad as that. But what can we as committee members and community do to kind of like help restore in little ways?
Thank you. That's a great question. There are a number of different activities going on. The Creeks Division, for example, we have a planting day scheduled for the Arroyo Borough Open Space, and several of our projects we lost some plants, so we're jumping back in to restore them. I think if you look on the Parks and Recreation website, there may be some opportunities there for people to participate in trail maintenance. I don't know the dates that they have those things scheduled. They do have some contract crews up doing trail maintenance because a lot of the trails were pretty significantly impacted.
Cameron, do you have the dates for the Arroyo Borough planting? I think it was deferred once.
Yes,
Might be helpful for the community watching the recording of this to know that.
Saturday, February 18th from 10 to noon at the Arroyo Borough Open Space. You can park at the end of Allen Road, or you could ride your bike or walk over there on the new multi-use path down Las Positas and across the footbridge to that. And we'll have a lot of native plants there and all the tools that people need. Bring your own gloves and some sturdy shoes if you come down for that. Another organization that does a lot of work around storm response is the Bucket Brigade. You can look them up on the website. And then there are a lot of resources available through the city of Santa Barbara. So if you just Google, I think City of Santa Barbara storm response assistance, you can find resources. So some people have lost some things, or they've been displaced or whatever. There's lots of resources available for that kind of thing as well. Thanks for the question.
And I will add that the Bucket Brigade went and dug out several properties in the wake of the storm pretty immediately. I think they've moved on, but I'm sure they're still available if somebody finds the need. Thank you. Chris?
And last thing, also in terms of trail maintenance, Sage Trail Alliance has been doing dig days every Saturday if anyone's ever interested in doing that.
Yes, so Sage Trail Alliance has been doing an amazing job on one of the trails that I get onto a lot, and I really appreciate that work. And they do good maintenance and repair work on the trails. It's really nice to see.
Cameron, thanks. I had a question. So I observed Mission Creek if you will, the West Mason Street Bridge, I'll call it, right? West Mason Street and Kimberly. Observed water rising, I think, from my estimation, to the 10-foot level from a good 4 feet. So it was pretty dramatic, but it was absolutely contained. I watched that water, flow by for 2 days, and my layman's opinion, what was designed there performed exactly to plan. However, and it's just my trying to understand, but I saw in a neighborhood a couple of days after January 9th, Coda Street west of Chapala, in that area, seemed like a lot of water had overflowed banks and had impacted homes and the street. I know that street was blocked off during the height of the storm. So I just wonder, as we talk about areas like that, if that was an impacted area, that's my perception, versus the area at Kimberly and Mason, which was perfectly fine. What are these areas, were they known areas that we've made so much progress over the last 20 years, but yet the job is still not done, if you will? Like, there's still projects and ideas and things like, yeah, if I could have improved that area over the last 20 years, we absolutely would have, right? It's still on the list. Or were there new things that came up like, oh, wow, we didn't expect this at all from this event on January 9th? Just kind of a sense of that in the spirit of what can this committee be made more aware of? How can this committee help advance those ideas and maybe influence those who might help to decide, what gets done?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I'll just start with just kind of a caveat of the Creeks Division. The Santa Barbara County has a flood control district. The people on the South Coast, gosh, many, many years ago, I want to say it was in the 80s-ish, voted to tax themselves an additional increment to the entire county flood control district for flood control projects within the South Coast. And the city's Public Works Department is very engaged in flood control related projects. So the Creeks Division partners with them. When we do a project on a creek, we have our own objectives of water quality and creek restoration, but obviously, our creek channels are our drainages for flood control, so that's always top of mind in our design. We have our public works engineers and the flood control district engineers review our projects for flood capacity and to ensure that we're not creating any problems. And we, where we can or where we have room, like at the Euroboro Open Space, we design our projects to improve flood protection in that area as well as downstream. With regard to Mason Street Bridge, I'm glad to hear that didn't overtop the. We're talking about Mission Creek in particular, and the Flood Control District and the city have partnered on the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control District, and it's really been a long-time partnership between the city's Public Works Department and the County Flood Control District. And they're building that project. That project was originally conceived in the 1960s. It's been under construction now for probably at least a decade, maybe more than a decade. And what the kind of logical step to do when you're doing a flood control project is you start at the bottom and you work your way up the channel, because if you open it up and you create capacity upstream, it only is going to jump out again downstream. And so that's what's happened. So the Cabrillo Bridge was replaced, and the Mason Street Bridge was replaced, and the section of creek in between that was expanded to accommodate, interestingly, a 25-year event. And there's been some question whether what is a 25-year event changes over time, because it's sort of a average over time. So there's some question, somewhere between a 20 and 25-year event will fit in there. But now we're looking at it and they're saying this is a 25-year event and it stayed contained in there. So that's a success for that project. That project has continued to be built all the way up to now. They're all up they're up past the freeway, so to Gutierrez Street, so just downstream of Gutierrez, all the way through the freeway. So there's a bypass. I don't know if you remember years ago, they built this big tunnel, a bypass underneath the train tracks. It was a huge, huge construction effort and engineering effort. So that's been built now up to the Gutierrez Bridge. The entire plan goes all the way up to Canon Perdido, where it would connect to what's called the Caltrans channel, so a big concrete flood control channel, and that goes up to Los Olivos Street. So, so that's the reach of that project, and they're slowly moving up through there. So some of the bridges have been replaced, say at Coda over Mission Creek, that's been replaced, but not all of the channel sections have been completed, and not all of the bridges have been completed up that high. So that's the answer there. And then looking forward to the rest of the city, the Public Works Department and Flood Control District, and now the Creeks Division is an active partner working with them on Sycamore Creek and Lower Sycamore Creek. There are neighborhoods that face some really serious flooding, and so there's a conceptual plan that's evolving to make improvements there as well. So yes, throughout the city, and that's why it's just moving up, not because of certain neighborhoods being more deserving, just the logical path for a flood.
Great. Thanks very much for the education. I appreciate it.
Penny, did you have any questions or comments? Okay. Again, thank you. Very impressive report and very impressive storm.
Yeah, it really was, and it was interesting to see, and hard for us also to get out there. So I was appreciative to see, to get that extra video from a community member, because I actually started driving out to go collect some videos, and I got to some things that looked a little hairy, and they were telling everybody shelter in place. And I turned around in a Prius. I didn't want to be made an example of, so I turned around and went back home and kind of sat tight. But so we tried to get out and grab some photos and videos when it was safe to do so. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for braving the elements and then having the common sense to turn around and go home. I think, unless there's anything else that committee members want to say, we are done for tonight and ready to adjourn. Shall we announce when the next meeting time is, just so people know, and location?
Our next meeting is scheduled for the third Wednesday of March, which I don't have my calendar in front of me. I believe it's the 19th, but we may, depending on what we have before us, we may cancel that meeting and substitute it with the budget subcommittee meeting, which you'll all be invited to and the public will be invited to, and we'll announce that once we have a date. We're moving through our budget preparation process. So once we've got a conceptual budget, we'll take that to the subcommittee, and then before we get to City Council and before we get to the full committee.
Thank you. It helps for any members of the public to know what's next. If there's nothing else, I think we're ready to adjourn. So thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.